Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, I think this afternoon I'd like to talk a bit about samadhi. This is a very important element of our meditation practice, and it's one which often doesn't get explained in much detail. And I'm often surprised at how many people have been practicing meditation for years and years and years, decades even, without ever really developing much samadhi. So I think it's important to have some understanding of what the important components are for developing good samadhi. And first off, emphasizing that samadhi is, in fact, a central element of Buddhist practice. So the basic framework of the Buddha's teachings is the Noble Eightfold Path, and one of the 8 steps is, in fact, samadhi, so correct samadhi. It's also one of the 7 bodhjanga, the 7 factors of awakening. One of them is samadhi. I believe it's one of the 5 spiritual powers. So it appears all over the place. So this is one of these really important elements of our practice. It's part of the threefold training. So sila, samadhi, and panya, which I was talking about yesterday. Again, samadhi appears there. So this is a really important element of our practice. And again, I've met a lot of Buddhist meditators who are just kind of resigned to the idea that they're going to have bad samadhi for the rest of their life. That samadhi is hopeless, but maybe in a future life it will be better. Or they think, oh, I'm just naturally bad at samadhi and there's no hope. I'll just practice some mindfulness and that's good enough for now. But I really do want to emphasize that developing strong samadhi is in fact a very important part of one's meditation practice. It's not to be overlooked. And also it's a very potent way of transforming the mind. You can often tell when somebody has a strong samadhi practice and they spend a lot of time in samadhi because they have this tangible aura of calm around them, this tangible feeling of serenity and peacefulness, which is quite noticeable if you're paying attention. So first off, talking a bit about the word samadhi itself. So the word samadhi, so it comes from the prefix sang, which means together. And the verb root di, which means to hold or to gather. So the word samadhi then means holding the mind together or collecting the mind together. So it has the sense of mental unification or mental collectedness. So mental stabilization. So making the mind unified, stable, collected. And the opposite of samadhi is dispersion or distraction, scatter-mindedness. The opposite of samadhi is when the mind is going all over the place. It's going in all kinds of different directions, which is often a familiar experience when we're practicing meditation, is the experience of the mind going in all different directions. It's the experience of the mind shooting all over the place, going in many different directions, thinking about different things, reacting to different sensations. So this is the opposite of samadhi, is distraction or scatteredness. Another counter to samadhi, another opposing condition to samadhi is dullness, sleepiness or haziness or blurriness of mind. So the state of samma samadhi is characterized by extremely strong awakeness, extremely strong alertness, awareness. So the mind is very awake, very alert. It has a precise, detailed knowing of one's experience. Again, a common misconception about samadhi practice is that the mind kind of slips into this blurry, hazy trance state. And in fact, some of the very early English translations of the Buddhist texts translated the word jhana, so jhana is a state of very strong samadhi. They translated the word jhana as trance, which is a phenomenal misunderstanding of the Buddha's teaching. So we're not trying to enter a trance state. We're actually trying to have a clear and accurate perception of reality as it is. And the Buddha is quite clear that this is the purpose of samadhi practice. So through stabilizing and focusing and sharpening the mind, then we develop an incredibly precise and accurate perception of reality. This is the function of samadhi, is that samadhi is a supporting condition for wisdom. It's a supporting condition for this precise, insightful knowing of our experience. So with samadhi practice, one thing that is very, very important, and this really can't be emphasized enough, is that the mental conditions we experience during meditation are determined by the mental conditions we cultivate outside of meditation. So if you spend all day watching TV and listening to music and chatting with your friends about silly things, then what do you think is going to happen when you do some meditation? You're going to be thinking about the TV and the music and the conversations with your friends, of course, naturally, because that's what you've been teaching your mind to do all day long. You've been teaching your mind to think about silly things all day long. So then you sit down to meditate and your mind thinks about silly things, naturally. Why would you expect anything else? So our mind is like a dog. It does exactly what you teach it to do. So, one of the most important things to consider in the development of our samadhi practice then is actually nothing whatsoever to do with our meditation method or meditation technique or meditation object or anything like that, but rather it's to consider, what am I doing with the rest of my time? Because this is what makes the biggest difference, actually. The biggest difference in the strength of our concentration and focus during meditation is what we're doing when we're not meditating. So the truth is that we train the mind every single waking moment. So we're not just training the mind during meditation. We're training the mind every single waking moment. So from the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you fall asleep at night, you're training your mind. It's just most of the time, we're training our mind in greed, hatred, and confusion. And then we devote about 30 minutes every day, if you're being diligent. We devote about 30 minutes every day to training the mind in contentment and clarity. That's great that you're doing at least 30 minutes. The question is, what are you doing with the other 15 and a half hours of your waking time? Training the mind in the opposite. So what do you think is going to win? Again, this is not difficult questions to figure out the answers to. So actually, if you want to have good meditation, then you should be cultivating the meditation mind from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep at night. So constantly trying to keep a mind which is quiet, stable, and alert at all times. And that also means considering what activities you're engaging in as you go throughout your day and how those activities affect the stability of the mind, the alertness of the mind, the stillness of the mind. What are you doing that's agitating the mind? What are you doing that's fueling your defilements? What are you doing that's making the mind more blurry or hazy? And how can we reduce those activities? Or if possible, even eliminate them entirely? So for many people, this is actually one of the really disappointing things they discover about meditation. So they think like, oh, I can just add in a little bit of meditation to my life and it will make my life better. It's like, well, yes, that's technically true, but if you actually want to get anywhere in your meditation practice, that does involve making lifestyle changes. So actually, when I first got interested in Buddhist meditation, I was actually living a very unholy life, and I thought, well, I'll just add in a bit of meditation and it will make my unholy life a little bit nicer. which is true, it did have that effect. But at some point, I started connecting the dots, and I realized that all these other things I was doing in my life was seriously counterproductive to the development of my meditation practice. So as my meditation practice became increasingly important to me, then naturally I started changing my lifestyle, and I started changing what I was doing with my time. Until eventually I wound up in a Buddhist monastery, and the rest is history, as they say. So that's been what I've been doing for my entire adult life. Best decision I've ever made, by the way. So if you're thinking about monastic life, come and talk to me after the program today. And I'll probably tell you no, but still it's worth exploring the question if the question is in your mind. But coming back to the point of samadhi, so again, the first thing is really carefully considering, how are we training our mind throughout the day? Are we training the mind to be distracted? Are we training the mind to be greedy? Are we training the mind to be aversive? Are we training the mind to daydream? Actually, daydreaming is one of the worst things you can do if you want to be good at your meditation practice. Every time you train your mind to space out and fantasize, then what do you think is going to happen when you try to meditate? You're going to space out and fantasize. Again, these are not complicated answers. The problem is that we usually don't bother to ask ourselves these questions. So it's this big mystery, like, why is my concentration so bad? Why is it so hard to meditate? And the answer is, once again, because you watch TV, you listen to music, you have angry conversations about silly things, you're constantly fixating on your sensual desires. That's why. But of course we don't like to think in that way. We're like, no, I must be using the wrong meditation method. I just need to use a different method. That's the solution. But then you switch to a different method and still same problem, bad concentration. Because we're not actually addressing the real problem. So this is actually the most important factor. If you want to have good concentration, the first thing is living a very quiet, peaceful life. So considering, what are you doing in your life that's agitating and stirring up the mind? What are you doing that's training the mind in defilement rather than purity? What's training the mind in spaciness or confusion or distraction rather than stabilized attention? Once that's cleared out of the way, then again, things like morality are extremely important. So maintaining kindness and consideration in everything we do. This also is a very important supporting factor for concentration. So following the precepts, practicing generosity, practicing compassion, these are also supporting conditions for good concentration. And so then once we have all of that clearly established, and of course practicing mindfulness in every moment, so always being clearly aware of, especially of your body, as you go throughout the day, never losing touch with the sensation of your body, and also watching your mind, what's going on in your mind. So once we have that basic foundation, then we can actually start talking about meditation practice, and it becomes a bit more relevant. So with samadhi, the critical factors of mind, so I already mentioned stillness and alertness as being the critical factors of samadhi. There's another very important element in the development of samadhi, which extends all the way up through the second jhana, which is the factor of euphoria or ecstasy. So this is and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. But first, starting on the emphasis on stillness and attentiveness. So stillness of mind, as long as the mind is moving in any way, it will never settle into deep samadhi. It will never come into deep concentration. So this means that whatever meditation method you're using, it needs to be one which is conducive towards stillness of mind. So things like body scanning will not get good samadhi. They can help with developing mindfulness to a certain degree, so they're not useless. In fact, they have a place. So like moving your attention through the body, those methods can be useful for cultivating mindfulness and doing certain kinds of insight practice. but they're not useful for developing samadhi because the mind is moving. As long as the mind is moving, it will not become still. This, again, it seems obvious, but we actually have to say these things out loud. As long as the mind is moving, it will not become still. So, one's meditation practice for samadhi needs to be focused on stillness, holding the mind completely still, so not moving the mind around at all. And usually we do this through picking some clearly defined region or location of our experience to focus the mind. So during the meditation instructions, I suggested focusing on your hands. This is a simple example. One of the most commonly taught methods is to focus on the tip of the nose. So the point where the breathing first enters the body at the nose. For many people, that's an effective method. For me, I never had any success with that, but many people do have success with it. Other common points are in your abdomen or in the torso. Some people like to focus on their tailbone because strong sensation at your tailbone when you're sitting. Really anywhere, it doesn't really matter where. You can also focus on the whole body as a single object. Again, it doesn't really matter what you use as the focal point of your attention. What matters is that that focal point is still, so that the mind can become still. And the factor of alertness or attentiveness, whatever you're focusing on, the mind should have incredibly detailed, precise awareness. So no blurriness or haziness at all. So as I mentioned during the meditation instructions, if you notice the mind is blurry or hazy at all, then to keep your eyes partly open. Actually some of the best samadhi I've had has been meditating with eyes open. And it's for this reason, because with your eyes open, you have an immediate feedback mechanism to let you know when the mind is getting blurry. So you'll notice it in your visual field when the mind is blurring, when the mind is becoming hazy. So with the eyes closed, it can be easy to kind of slip into a sleep state without even noticing what's happening. So keeping your eyes open helps to prevent that. But of course, if the mind is already very awake and very alert, it's okay to meditate with eyes closed, but you do need to be very attentive to make sure you're not slipping into a dull state, a hazy state. And then this factor of euphoria or ecstasy. So this is one which often gets neglected, but it is a very important element. So this is the key distinguishing characteristic of first and second jhana, which for most people is their primary target in developing samadhi. So the Buddha gave 4 distinct milestones in the cultivation of samadhi practice, the cultivation of concentration, which are what we call the 4 jhanas. So first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. And realistically, most people are nowhere near even first jhana. So for most people, this is your target, in developing samadhi, your target is getting to first jhana. So understanding the necessary components of first jhana can be a helpful guideline to developing one's samadhi practice. And one of the most obvious characteristics of first jhana, so besides what I've already mentioned, so mental unification and alertness of mind, the major characteristic of first jhana is this euphoria, ecstasy, which in Pali is called piti. So piti means, again, euphoria, ecstasy. Bliss is okay as a translation. You'll also say rapture, which I find an absolutely terrible translation of this word. I think euphoria or ecstasy is actually a much more accurate translation. So the term piti refers to this incredibly strong, intensely pleasant sensation all throughout the body. Kind of like your whole body was on fire in a good way, not in the like burning to death way, but in that like radiant warmth kind of way, or in that like electric intensity kind of way. Like your whole body is shining with pure bliss, with pure pleasure. This is something which often when people are talking about concentration practice, they talk about this as a result. That if you practice concentration, then eventually you'll get the result of this euphoria starting to arise. And that's technically true, but it can also be used as a method. So as you pay attention to the body, as your mindfulness becomes increasingly strong, you become increasingly aware of the body, then actively enjoy the sensation of your body. So perceiving the body sensation as pleasant. And this will start to produce that sense of intense electric pleasure sensation in the body. And as you start to produce it, then you can focus on intensifying it. Another way to approach this is to look at the body sensations and see if there's any body sensation currently happening which is enjoyable, which is pleasant. And as you focus on that, focus on making it increasingly pleasant and also increasingly pervasive. So kind of permeating the whole body with that pleasant sensation and making it increasingly strong, increasingly pleasant, until eventually the entire body is saturated with this increasingly strong and intense pleasant sensation. And this naturally supports the development of concentration. So the more you enjoy the sensation of the body, the more focused you will be on the sensation of the body. And the more focused you are, the more enjoyable it is. So these two factors will keep building on each other until naturally you just start losing interest in doing anything else with the mind. So why do we think about other things during meditation? Besides the fact that we train our mind to think about random stuff all day long. Why else do we think about other things during meditation? Because we're bored and we're craving pleasure. And just sitting here and doing nothing for 30 minutes is really boring and not very pleasant. Do you agree with this, young man? Really boring? Yeah, most people find it really boring in the beginning and in the middle. But usually after about 5 or 10 years, it starts to get pretty good. So you need to have a long-term perspective with meditation. You don't normally get instant results. This is a long-term project, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I've been doing this for 20 years, and trust me, it's worth it. I know 20 years sounds like a really long time, and it is a really long time, but it's still worth it. Anyway, so what was I talking about? Yes, so we think about other things because we're bored and we're craving pleasure. And just like sitting here and paying attention to our body, in the beginning is not necessarily a particularly fun activity. Again, as your mindfulness and concentration grow, it becomes an increasingly enjoyable activity, but in the beginning it's not particularly enjoyable. So our mind seeks pleasure in the ways it knows how to seek pleasure. So through thinking about interesting things, or bringing up interesting memories, or making interesting plans. These are ways which the mind tries to find pleasure. Or fantasizing and daydreaming. Again, fantasy is often much more interesting than reality, so that's another way we seek pleasure. Or we drift off into sleepiness. So that kind of smothering blanket of dullness has a certain pleasure of its own. So that's also a way that we seek pleasure. So training the mind to find pleasure in the focused, concentrated, unified mind is a direct antidote to that problem. So developing this pleasant sensation in the body, cultivating this euphoric appreciation of the body sensation, then naturally will counteract the tendency of the mind to go in other directions. It will help to keep the mind focused on the body. And I keep talking about focusing on the body, by the way, because one, this is the method which I normally use for practicing samadhi. And two, it's for most people, using physical sensation is the safest way to practice samadhi. The opposite is to develop a mental object as the basis of concentration. For most people, that's not a particularly good idea because it tends to lead to spacing out and daydreaming. So for example, you'll hear things like visualize a white circle, and focus on the white circle. And again, that can be good for some people, but for most people, they're like visualizing the white circle, and then it's like, okay, now it's a rainbow circle, and now it's a rainbow unicorn, and rainbow unicorn jumping through the meadows, and pretty soon you're not really meditating anymore. You're having a great time doing whatever you're doing, but you're not really meditating. And then the bell rings, and you're like, wow, that was great. But your samadhi hasn't improved at all. So for these reasons, we normally recommend mindfulness of the body, because this helps to keep us from slipping into fantasy mode. And I'm thinking about a rainbow unicorn jumping through a meadow. Anyway, so cultivating this euphoric enjoyment of the body is, again, this is a really powerful support to the cultivation of samadhi. It's not to be dismissed. So other supporting factors for samadhi, again, it's the persistence in our meditation practice. So stillness of mind, I've been talking about stillness of mind. Stillness of mind is directly supported by stillness of body. So one thing which is incredibly helpful is to make a resolution at the beginning of the meditation period, make a resolution that you're going to let your body be completely still the entire time. No matter what sensations appear, no matter how painful or distracting or uncomfortable your body becomes, keep the body completely still. Don't let it move at all. And again, this can be a bit challenging in the beginning, especially when you're not used to sitting still for long periods of time, and you become increasingly aware of your body. Then you become increasingly aware of just how uncomfortable your body is. So it's necessary then to cultivate equanimity. So equanimity is another powerful supporting condition for the development of samadhi. So equanimity, in the simplest terms, equanimity is a non-reactive mind. So a mind that does not react to any sensation or any experience. So normally what we do is whenever we have any kind of sensation, is we immediately classify it as one of three things: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And once we've done that, then we go into reacting to that with desire for the pleasant, aversion towards the unpleasant, and apathy towards the neutral. So this is the opposite of equanimity. So reactivity is the opposite of equanimity. So we have a sensation in the body. That's enough. Be aware of the sensation in the body without reacting. End of story. But normally what we do is then we're like, okay, sensation in the body, it's pleasant, I like it, I want more of it. So then the mind goes into that desire and attachment mode. Or sensation in the body, this is the more common story, that is unpleasant. My knee hurts, my back hurts, my nose itches, my head itches. The sound from the kitchen is irritating me. The sound from my neighbor is irritating me. Like the mind starts reacting negatively to things. And in the case of body sensations, then we usually respond to unpleasant body sensations with moving our body. So trying to eliminate the sensation by moving our body. Which seems like a good idea at the time. It's like, okay, my hips are hurting. Well, if I just move a little bit, then the pain goes away. Perfect. And then 2 minutes later, oh, my knee is hurting. Better move a little bit. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Oh, back is hurting. That's better. And then the whole meditation goes by and you just spent the entire time fidgeting and moving around. And did you ever actually completely escape pain in that way? No, because new painful sensations just kept appearing. This is the nature of the body. The nature of the body is to produce painful sensations. Why would we expect it to be anything otherwise? So you just start at the beginning. You recognize the nature of the body is to produce sensations. Many of those sensations are going to be painful. Who cares? I'm just going to keep sitting still and remaining alert, because this is the nature of the body. The nature of the body is to produce sensations. So when painful sensations arise, we are aware of them, but we just accept that as just being part of the nature of the body. And in this way, it isn't a distraction. And I say this in a glib way, but of course the actuality is very difficult because we have extremely deeply rooted habits of trying to avoid pain at all costs, no matter what. Whenever there's a painful sensation, we always try to make it stop. But during meditation practice, instead we're staying present with whatever's going on. So the painful sensation occurs, well, your practice is to patiently stay with it. Patiently stay with the experience, with a complete acceptance of it. So not like, I hate this, when is this going to end? I hate this. But actually just accepting, oh, this is just completely normal and natural, and there's actually nothing wrong here. So I'm just going to be with this experience, even if it lasts for the rest of eternity. That's okay. I'm just going to sit right here with it for the rest of eternity. And if you have that attitude, then the sensation will stop bothering you. So if we stay with the sensation with this attitude of complete acceptance, then there's no problem at all. And an added layer to this, because often when we talk about acceptance, there's still an underlying tone of negativity. Like, I guess I just have to accept this horrible sensation. So an added layer is cultivating a mind of genuine interest and curiosity. So what is this sensation really? What's really going on here? So I actually really want to pay close attention to this so I can understand it. So cultivating that mind of genuine interest and curiosity is what brings this kind of like resistant acceptance all the way into full-scale equanimity. So acceptance coupled with interest, with curiosity. So really, really wanting to fully understand and know your experience. And this becomes especially relevant if one has an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So the Buddha said that the cause of all suffering is desire. So why are we suffering when we're experiencing a painful sensation? Because we desire for that sensation to go away. So right there, you're clearly seeing the Four Noble Truths. Right in that moment when you pay attention to your pain with acceptance and curiosity, you're developing a deeper understanding of the Four Noble Truths. You're understanding, okay, this is suffering. It's caused by my desire for the sensation to go away. If I stay with the sensation with acceptance and curiosity, then the desire fades away, which also means it's not painful anymore. It's not disturbing anymore. I'm not suffering anymore. And so we understand how through Buddhist practice we're able to overcome our own sense of pain, our own sense of suffering. And of course this applies to mental suffering as well, not just to physical suffering. But with physical pain, it's usually much more immediately tangible, immediately obvious. And in the course of developing samadhi, it's learning how to conquer our reactive tendencies towards physical sensations. That is especially critical at this stage. So just getting to the point where you can sit still is necessary if you want to get anywhere in your samadhi practice. And the more still you sit, the deeper you can get into samadhi. So again, like we sit down and we're like, okay, I'm sitting still. We start paying a little more attention and you realize, actually, I'm not quite still. I'm kind of twitching a little bit. Like twitching my toes a little bit, or twitching my legs a little bit, or twitching my face a little bit, or like my eyes are kind of jittering a little bit. Like you notice there's some kind of movement still going on in the body. So then we need to learn how to let that movement stop as well. So letting the body become completely still. Until eventually the only movement that's happening in the body is the slow beating of your heart and the slow movement of your breathing. So that kind of needs to happen. At least in very, very advanced stages of samadhi, that can actually slow to a point of almost stopping. But for most of us, you kind of need to let your breathing continue and your heart continue. It's helpful. But all other movement should be brought to a complete stop, which is actually more straightforward than it sounds. So the body only moves when you make it move. So just don't make it move. And here's a little secret to samadhi. It's exactly the same with the mind. The mind only moves when you make it move. So just don't move your mind. That actually could have been the whole Dhamma talk, is right there. Like, samadhi, don't move your mind. But of course we have to say a little bit more than that, because if I said that, would that have helped at all? Don't move your mind. Not really. That's why we give longer talks. Every now and then I do envy the Zen masters of old who could give a complete Dhamma talk in 3 words. These days we have to talk a bit more. So again, that's a brief overview of supporting conditions for samadhi. So talking again about stillness of body, and in particular conquering the negative reaction towards pain. There's actually a very direct way of doing this, by the way, and I do periodically recommend this, and usually whenever I recommend this, people think I'm kidding, but I'm really not kidding. If you really want to conquer pain sensation during meditation, if you really want to learn how to have perfect equanimity towards body sensation, here's the way. Every day for the next week, sit in continuous sitting meditation for 4 hours straight. So every day, 4 hours continuous meditation every day. It will be agonizingly painful. This will be utterly miserable. You will hate me. But by the end of the week, you will have a completely different attitude towards pain. And by the end of the week, you will discover that you can sit completely still no matter what's going on in your body. And you can be completely unbothered by even the most intensely painful sensations. But in order to get there, you're going to pass through some stages of incredibly intense pain. And it's through directly facing that and staying with it that you will discover what pain actually is. And what you'll discover, and I talk about this from experience because this actually happened to me many, many years ago when I was still a junior monastic. There was a monk was leading a retreat at the monastery, and this is what he told us to do. He actually made it optional, which I thought was very compassionate of him. But he said, I'm going to do this every day, actually for 2 weeks. So I'm giving you a discount, only 1 day. He said, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to do this every day. He said, from 1:30 to 5:30 in the afternoon, I'm going to sit down at 1:30, and I'm not going to get up from my seat until 5:30. And he said, I'm going to do this every day, and I invite you to join me. So, of course. So normally what you do during retreats is you alternate between sitting and walking. Like you sit for maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and then you walk for maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then you sit for a while, walk for a while. So kind of switching between the two. And so he was saying to just sit for 4 hours straight. So actually at first I was like, this is crazy. So the first couple of days I was like, no, I'm just going to keep switching, sitting, walking. But then after about the second or third day, I saw like this monk was really doing it. He would go in the hall at 1:30, and he would get up from his seat at 5:30. Actually, sometimes he would even stay past 5:30. He would just keep going. And so, yeah, after a couple of days, I joined. And it's just incredible how much pain the body can produce just by sitting still for a couple hours. But staying with it, at some point you realize that pain has nothing to do with the body. Pain is not a body thing at all. Pain is a mental reaction to the body. And that's something we can control. So we can choose to not perceive the body as painful. But in order to get there, it's very, very helpful to directly observe the pain experience to the point where eventually you can separate the body sensation from the mental reaction. So normally we have these two things completely mixed together. We don't recognize they're two separate things. We think the body sensation and the mental reaction are exactly the same thing, and we just call it pain. But through this direct observation of pain, you can get to a point where you can pull these two apart, and you realize there's the body sensation, which is inherently neutral. The body sensation is not pain. The body sensation is just information. That's it. The mental reaction is what makes it painful. The mental reaction of, I hate this, this has to stop, this is so awful. That's the pain, not the body sensation. So once you make that realization, once you can separate these two components of the pain experience, then you'll realize that the mental part is an activity that you're engaging in. And you can just stop doing that activity. And the sensation might still be there, but it will no longer register as pain. It will just register as information about the current state of the body. So this is a very, very useful practice to do. If you've never done this, do it at least once in your life. Again, you'll hate me for the first couple hours, and then after that, you'll start to understand why I told you to do this. This might take a few days, by the way, so don't give up after the first day. Very important that you sit with good posture, by the way. If you sit with bad posture for 4 hours straight, you can actually injure yourself. But if you sit with good posture, then your body is actually perfectly safe. So by good posture, I mean sitting in a way that your legs and feet are not going to fall asleep, sitting in a way that your back is straight and your shoulders are swiveled back, your head is upright. So if you're sitting like slouched and hunched, then yeah, after a couple hours, you can start to develop neck problems, back problems. That's not good. If you're sitting with pressure on your feet or ankles, then yeah, you can eventually cause nerve damage. But if you sit properly, then there's no risk to your body. You should sit properly anyway, because it's good for your meditation. But especially for long periods of sitting, you need to sit with really good posture. I think at this time I can go ahead and conclude the Dhamma talk, and then I'll take any questions that you might have. Sadhu